The iron gates of Eastern State Penitentiary groaned shut behind me with a finality that made my stomach clench. I was here for what should have been a routine paranormal investigation, just another night spent chasing shadows and electronic voice phenomena for my YouTube channel. I'd done dozens of these investigations before, but nothing had prepared me for what waited in the crumbling corridors of America's most haunted prison. The October air bit through my jacket as I stood in the central hub, my equipment bag heavy on my shoulder. The penitentiary's infamous wagon wheel design stretched out before me like the spokes of some nightmarish clock, each cell block radiating into darkness. The tour guide had left an hour ago, and now it was just me, my cameras, and whatever souls still wandered these decaying halls. I'd done my research, of course. Eastern State Penitentiary had housed some of the most violent criminals in American history since 1829. Al Capone himself had been held here, though his cell was supposedly comfortable compared to the hellish isolation most inmates endured. The prison's revolutionary solitary confinement system had driven men mad, and many never left, not even after death. My first stop was cell block 12, where visitors most commonly reported shadow figures. I'd barely made it 10 feet down the corridor when the temperature plummeted. My breath began misting, and every hair on my arm stood on end. The EMF detector in my hand started clicking rapidly, its lights flashing red in an erratic pattern that made no sense. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Is someone here with me?" The silence that followed was deafening, but it wasn't empty. It felt pregnant with malevolent attention, as if dozens of unseen eyes were studying me from the shadows. I raised my thermal camera and scanned the corridor ahead. Cold spots appeared and vanished like phantoms, moving with purpose down the hallway. That's when I heard it, the sound of metal scraping against stone, coming from somewhere deeper in the cell block. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like someone dragging chains across the floor. My heart hammered against my ribs as I forced myself to move toward the sound. The scraping stopped the moment I took a step forward. I stood frozen, straining to hear anything over the blood rushing in my ears. The old building creaked and settled around me, but underneath those familiar sounds was something else, breathing that wasn't my own. Slow, labored, as if someone with damaged lungs was struggling for air just beyond my vision. My flashlight beam trembled as I swept it across the cells lining the corridor. Most doors hung open, revealing small chambers barely large enough for a man to lie down. The ones that were closed seemed somehow more menacing, as if something terrible waited behind their solid barriers. In cell 12B, my light caught something that made me stumble backward. A shadow figure stood pressed against the far wall, tall and impossibly thin. It didn't move when my light hit it, didn't flee like shadows should. Instead, it seemed to absorb the light, becoming darker and more defined. I fumbled for my video camera, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. When I looked up again, the shadow was gone, but the cell door, which had been standing open, was now closed. The metal clang of it slamming shut still echoed in the air. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, backing away from the cell. The EMF detector in my other hand was going crazy, beeping in what almost sounded like Morse code. Long beep, short beep, long beep. SOS. Someone, or something, was calling for help. I should have left right then. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to run, to get as far from this place as possible before whatever force inhabited these walls decided I'd seen too much. But the investigator in me, the part that had driven me to explore dozens of supposedly haunted locations, wouldn't let me go. I moved deeper into the cell block, following the intermittent beeping of my equipment. The air grew thicker with each step, like walking through invisible cobwebs. My skin crawled with the sensation of being touched by unseen hands, gentle caresses that felt more like warnings than welcome. The corridor ahead curved slightly, and as I rounded the bend, I saw him. An inmate stood in the middle of the hallway, maybe 30 feet away. He was solid, real, dressed in the striped uniform of Eastern State's early days. His back was to me, head hanging forward as if he were studying something on the ground. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge my presence, just stood there like a mannequin forgotten in a museum display. "Excuse me," I called out, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. The figure didn't respond. I took a step closer, then another. My camera was recording, but I could barely hold it steady. The man's hair was dark and greasy, hanging in limp strands around his face. His hands, hanging at his sides, were unnaturally pale, almost translucent. When I was close enough to touch him, he turned around. I've never screamed so loud in my life. The sound that tore from my throat was primal, filled with a terror I didn't know I was capable of feeling. The thing wearing the inmate's uniform had no face, just smooth, gray skin where features should have been. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, yet somehow I knew it was looking at me, studying me with an intelligence that felt ancient and hungry. I ran. There's no shame in admitting it. I turned and sprinted back down the corridor, my equipment bouncing and clattering as I fled. Behind me, I could hear footsteps following, the soft whisper of prison slippers against concrete. But they weren't running footsteps. They were walking, steady and patient, as if whatever followed me knew I had nowhere to go. The central hub felt like a sanctuary when I burst through the cell block entrance, but the relief was short-lived. My thermal camera, still clutched in my death grip, showed cold spots throughout the circular chamber. They moved in patterns around me, like predators circling prey. I tried to calm myself, tried to think rationally. I'd come here to document paranormal activity, and I was certainly getting more than I'd bargained for. The scientific part of my mind tried to rationalize what I'd seen, tricks of light and shadow, the power of suggestion in such an ominous place. But the EMF detector wouldn't stop beeping, and the temperature continued to drop. I decided to try a different approach. If these were spirits of former inmates, maybe they just wanted acknowledgement, someone to hear their stories. I pulled out my digital recorder and set it on the floor in the center of the hub. "I'm not here to cause trouble," I said aloud, my voice stronger now that I'd found some small measure of courage. "I'm here to listen. If you have something to say, I'm ready to hear it." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the recorder's LCD display began showing sound levels that spiked and fell in regular patterns. I played back what it had captured, and my blood turned to ice water. Multiple voices, layering over each other in a cacophony of despair. They spoke in different languages, different time periods, but the anguish was universal. I could make out individual words and phrases. "Help me. I didn't do it. So cold. Please, I want to go home. They left me here to rot." And underneath it all, a voice that was different from the others. Clearer, more recent. It spoke directly to me. "You shouldn't have come here alone." The recording ended, but the voice continued, now coming from somewhere behind me. I spun around, but the hub was empty, or appeared to be. The shadows between the cell block entrances seemed deeper now, more substantial. "Who are you?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I was like you once," the voice replied. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Curious. Foolish. I came here to prove there was nothing to fear." "What happened to you?" A sound like laughter, but hollow and broken. "I learned that some doors should never be opened. Some questions should never be asked. And some places." The voice trailed off, then resumed from a different direction. "Some places don't let you leave once they've claimed you." The temperature plummeted another 20 degrees. I could see my breath in thick clouds now, and frost was beginning to form on the metal fixtures around the hub. My equipment registered electromagnetic readings off the charts, as if the very air was charged with supernatural energy. That's when I noticed the sounds coming from all 7 cell blocks simultaneously. Doors slamming. Chains rattling. Footsteps, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. The cacophony of a prison in full operation, as if Eastern State had suddenly sprung back to life around me. But these weren't the sounds of a functioning institution. They were the sounds of chaos, of riots and violence and desperation. I grabbed my equipment and ran for cell block 3, thinking I could hide in one of the cells until the manifestation passed. But as I entered the corridor, I realized my mistake. The sounds weren't coming from empty air, they were coming from the cells themselves. Behind every door, occupied or not, something was moving. Shadows passed by the small windows, and hands, gray, translucent hands, reached through the bars. Some cells that had been empty when I'd entered were now occupied by figures in various states of decay and despair. In cell 3A, a man sat on the narrow cot with his head in his hands, weeping silently. When he looked up at me, his eyes were hollow sockets filled with darkness. Cell 3B housed a figure that paced back and forth, wearing a groove in the floor that I could actually see deepening with each step. In 3C, an inmate stood facing the wall, repeatedly banging his head against the stone. With each impact, dark stains spread across the concrete. I realized with growing horror that I was witnessing the psychic imprints of Eastern State's history, layer upon layer of suffering and madness, all playing out simultaneously. The prison wasn't just haunted, it was a recording device, capturing and replaying every moment of anguish that had ever occurred within its walls. The voice that had spoken to me in the hub whispered from directly behind my ear, "Now you begin to understand." I spun around, but nothing was there. Nothing visible, anyway. The presence was undeniable, though, a cold intelligence that pressed against my mind like icy fingers. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Want?" The voice seemed amused. "We don't want anything from you. We want you." Another voice to join the chorus. Another soul to keep us company in the dark. That's when I felt the first touch. Fingers, cold as winter, brushed against my cheek. Then another hand touched my shoulder, and another grasped at my wrist. I looked down and saw them, dozens of transparent hands reaching out from the very walls, trying to pull me into the stone itself. I fought against them, but for every hand I pulled away from, two more took its place. They weren't violent, exactly, but they were insistent. Desperate. Like drowning people trying to drag someone down with them. "Don't fight it," the voice urged. "It will be easier if you don't fight. We've been alone for so long. Just let go. Let us show you what it's like to be part of something eternal." The hands were stronger now, more solid. They began to pull me toward the wall of cell 3D, and I could see faces beginning to emerge from the stone, hollow-eyed visages of the dead, mouths open in silent screams. They wanted me to join them, to become another echo in their endless nightmare. I pulled out the only weapon I had, my camera's flash. The bright strobe cut through the supernatural darkness like a knife, and the hands recoiled with what sounded like screams of pain. The faces in the wall writhed and disappeared, and for a moment, I was free. I ran again, this time toward what I hoped was an exit. But the prison had become a maze, corridors stretching longer than they should, doors leading to rooms that hadn't existed moments before. The building itself was alive, reshaping itself to keep me trapped. Behind me, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Not just footsteps now, but the clank of chains, the rattle of keys, the slam of cell doors. It was as if every guard and inmate who had ever walked these halls was chasing me through the darkness. I found myself in a part of the prison I didn't recognize, a narrow corridor lined with cells so small they were barely closets. This must have been the punishment block, where the most troublesome inmates were kept in conditions that would be considered torture by today's standards. The door at the end of the corridor stood slightly ajar, and pale light spilled out from whatever lay beyond. It was the first light I'd seen that wasn't from my own equipment, and I stumbled toward it like a moth to flame. The room beyond was circular, with a domed ceiling that seemed to stretch impossibly high. In the center stood a chair, not an electric chair, but something worse. It was made of metal and leather, with straps and restraints that spoke of prolonged suffering. Around the chair, the walls were covered in scratches and stains that told stories I didn't want to understand. But I wasn't alone in the room. They stood in a circle around the chair, dozens of figures in various states of decay and despair. Inmates from different eras, guards with hollow eyes, and others I couldn't identify. They all faced inward, toward the chair, as if waiting for something. "Sit down," said the familiar voice, now coming from one of the figures, a tall man in a guard's uniform whose face was a ruin of shadow and bone. "It's time for you to join us properly." "I won't," I said, backing toward the door. But it was already closing, the heavy metal barrier sliding shut with a sound like a tomb ceiling. "You don't have a choice," the guard said, stepping forward. "You came here seeking the supernatural, and now you've found it. This is what you wanted, isn't it? To be part of something bigger than yourself?" The other figures began to move, closing in around me. Some reached out with arms that were nothing but bone and sinew, while others simply watched with eyes that burned like coals in their sunken sockets. I tried to use the camera flash again, but the battery was dead. My other equipment had gone silent, as if the supernatural energy in the room had drained everything electronic. I was defenseless, alone, surrounded by the accumulated malevolence of nearly 2 centuries. But then I remembered something, a piece of advice from an old paranormal investigator I'd met years before. If you ever find yourself trapped by hostile spirits, he'd said, remember that they feed on fear. Take away their food, and they lose their power. It was easier said than done, but I forced myself to stop running, stop fighting. I stood in the center of the circle and closed my eyes. I'm not afraid of you, I said, and was surprised to find that I meant it. You're trapped here just like I am. You're not evil, you're suffering. You've been suffering for so long that you've forgotten what it feels like to be human. The figure stopped moving. The room fell silent except for the sound of my own breathing. I'm sorry for what happened to you, I continued. I'm sorry you died here, sorry you were forgotten, sorry your pain was ignored. But I can't stay. I can't become part of your suffering. I have a life to live, people who care about me. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, the figures began to fade. Not disappearing, fading, like photographs left too long in sunlight. The malevolence in the room dissipated, replaced by something that felt almost like gratitude. The guard was the last to go. Before he faded completely, he spoke one final time, tell them we were here. Tell them we suffered. Don't let them forget us. And then I was alone in an empty room with an open door. I walked out of Eastern State Penitentiary as the sun was rising, my equipment bag lighter now, several pieces had simply stopped working during the night. The guards at the gate looked surprised to see me, as if they'd forgotten I was supposed to be there. How was your investigation? One of them asked. I looked back at the towering walls of the prison, at the guard towers silhouetted against the dawn sky. Somewhere in there, the dead were still waiting, still suffering, still hoping that someone would remember their stories. Educational, I said. I never published the footage from that night. Some stories are too important to sensationalize, too sacred to turn into entertainment. But I did write letters, dozens of them, to historical societies, to the prison administration, to anyone who would listen. I told them about the conditions the inmates had endured, about the lives lost and forgotten, about the human cost of our justice system. Most of the letters went unanswered, but some didn't. Slowly, quietly, changes began to happen. Memorial plaques were installed. Educational programs were expanded. The stories of the dead began to be told with dignity and respect. I never went back to Eastern State Penitentiary, but sometimes, late at night, I think I can still hear them whispering in the darkness. Not calling for help anymore, but simply saying thank you. And sometimes, just sometimes, I whisper back, you're welcome. You're remembered. You're not forgotten. The dead, I learned that night, don't want much. They just want to be acknowledged, to have their suffering mean something, to know that their lives, however broken, mattered. Eastern State Penitentiary taught me that the most frightening ghost stories aren't about vengeful spirits or demonic entities. They're about human beings reduced to shadows of themselves, trapped by circumstances beyond their control, forgotten by the world they once knew. The real horror isn't in the supernatural, it's in how we treat each other, and how the echoes of that treatment can resonate long after we're gone. But on cold October nights, when the wind howls through empty streets and shadows seem to move with purpose, I still remember the feeling of those ghostly hands reaching out from the walls. Still hear the voice asking me to stay, to join the eternal chorus of the forgotten. And sometimes, God help me, part of me wishes I had. Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like and subscribe button, and then share it with your friends. Your support helps us grow and create even more awesome content. We appreciate you being part of the journey.